Good evening, Rabotai. We'll continue with the laws of meat and milk. The Gemara Pesachim Dalet tells us just we learn from a Nazir, a person who made a vow not to drink any wine. It's just like he's not allowed to drink water that had grapes soaked in it because it has the taste of the grapes. So too we learn from there that anything that has the taste of the food, it's as if you ate the same food as well. So therefore, that's why Maran writes that if a person has, let's say, a meat pot, even though there's no meat in the pot, and he's going to go cook something dairy, and he's not allowed to cook something dairy in there. Why? Because it has inside the pots, they have the taste of the meat, and therefore it's going to go into the food, and it's as if you're eating milk and meat. Allah views it the same thing. So therefore, a person has to avoid, and he has to have the meat pots, and he has to have his dairy pots, and make sure not to cross-contaminate, make sure not to mix them up. In the case where a person did mix them up, what is the halacha? So the Gemara in the Sechta Avodah Zarah, Ayin Hey with Bet, tells us that the food will become forbidden. In general, we know that taste is the real thing. It's the same thing as the food was in there. And therefore, if you don't have 1/60th, then it's not going to be nullified, it's going to be a sur. However, this only applies when? Within 24 hours. The Gemara tells us, and like the Gemara mentioned, that if it's past 24 hours, it's not in time nifgam. The taste is stale. This that there's a taste in the pot past 24 hours is a stale taste, and halachically it's viewed as negligible. It's halachically viewed as nothing. So therefore, the food, that's what Maran writes in Siman Tzadikima, also, if a person mistakenly cooked a dairy food in a meat pot, and that meat pot was not used within 24 hours, the food is mutar, the food is permitted. But the pot still needs to be kosher. The pot needs to, if you cooked it with water, so you need to do agala. If you do it without water, it needs libun, whatever it may be. The person has to do the proper and koshering process appropriately. But the food is mutar. Now, in a situation like this, why is it that we have to kosher the pot? Didn't we say that once it's 24 hours, the taste is negligible? So the Gemara explains that the rabbis made a decree that you have to kosher the pots even after 24 hours. Why? Because maybe people will make a mistake and think that even within 24 hours, it also is permitted. So therefore, it's a decree that the sages made upon us to make sure not to lead any confusion. What if a person doesn't remember when the last time I used this pot? You cooked a lot of things that day. These pots, they all look the same. I don't remember when I used it. There's a little bit of mahalog in the Rishonim. Tosafot says you can assume that it was not used within 24 hours. The Rambam says you must assume it was used within 24 hours, but the Shulchan Aruch, then he follows the halakha in Siman Dalet, Siman Chabed, that a person can assume that it was not used within 24 hours, and you can be lenient. So in a case where you don't remember if I used this pot within 24 hours or not, you can be lenient and assume that you did not use it within 24 hours. This separate from all this whole discussion was, according to Sfaradim, not including glass plates. According to Sfaradim, in glass plates, Siman Taf Nun Aleph, Maran says glass plates do not absorb and do not give off taste. Therefore, if a person uses one glass bowl or a glass pot, if you may, or if you use a glass plate to serve food or whatnot, all these situations, they can be used interchangeably for meat and the dairy. Obviously, you wash them in between because glass, according to Sfaradim, does not absorb and does not give off taste. Ashkenazim Rahmir, the Ramah brings the Harmin Hagis that treated like pottery, that it is not allowed to be used interchangeably, but according to Sfaradim, you can use glass plates for meat, wash it, and then use it for dairy, and vice versa. There's a wonderful story with Hizkiyahu Medini, Alav Shalom, one of the great Chachamim we had, who wrote the Stei Hamed. He lived approximately 150 years ago, and he writes in a memoir of how he was zochet to get the wisdom he had. He wasn't such a smart person, he writes about himself. There was something that happened in his life that all of a sudden the gates of wisdom opened for him, he said. And he was remembering, he was younger, he was learning Bet Midrash, and one day there was some people who were jealous about him, how he was so serious, and he always came and he always learned. They said, how did this person do so much? He's so serious, he's so dedicated, and they put Ayin Hara on him. So there was one person who was very, very jealous of him, that he paid off the cleaning lady to go say rumors about him, that something happened between him and her when they were alone in the room. So therefore they were bad-mouthing the rabbi, and eventually this caused Hizkiyahu Medini to get kicked out of the Bet Midrash. This was giving him a parnasah, this was supporting him, this was giving him ability to learn Torah, and someone was jealous on him and took a bad action against him. They said Lashon Hara about him, and he got kicked out. He ended up having to leave. But Afterwards, the head person who was supporting the kollel, he found out about this. He says, "What do you mean? This person is tzaddik, has v'shalom, he never did such a thing." And they ended up firing, and not believing the story, they ended up firing the cleaning lady. This cleaning lady eventually never found another job, and she became very poor. And she came crying to Chizka Medini, "Please forgive me. Please, I'll go in the Beit Midrash and I'll announce to everybody it was a lie, it was a bribe. I'll tell everybody the whole story. Please, I cannot find any job since this happened. Please, you must forgive me. We must change what happened." And he thought about it, and he thought about it, and he said, "You know what? I'll try to convince her to rehire you, but we don't need to say anything about the story. I don't need to take revenge." She said, "Why?" He said, "Listen, it's already Hilul Hashem. People already spoke bad about a rabbi. So now I go make another Hilul Hashem, talk about how this other rabbi, what he really did, and make it a bigger story. Better I shouldn't take revenge. I'll give in. I'll let it go, and we'll just try to help you find a job." In the end, that's what happened. He tried to help her find a job. He never made mention of this story to anybody. In the end, he says after he did that, he was mohel. He forgave. He felt all the gates of wisdom open for him, and he started writing. He wrote one of the greatest svarim that there ever was. This Nestei Hamed. It's almost like an encyclopedia. How he felt that he wasn't able to do this before, but after he did this, he was able to write such a sefer. So therefore, we should take upon ourselves, right before the day of Shavuot, the Jewish people were in Mount Sinai like one nation with one heart. We should also chet to mohel one another. B'ezrat Hashem b'zchut this, we have all the brachot in Yeshua.